Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered who you truly are beneath the surface? Not the roles you play, the titles you carry, or the expectations you fulfill, but the real you. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Success isn't something waiting for you out in the world. It's something waiting to be unlocked within you. This journey doesn't begin with external validation or achievement. It begins with self-awareness, transformation, and the courage to confront the hidden parts of your soul. Carl Jung believed that every human being has an untapped reservoir of potential buried beneath their conscious mind. But accessing that potential requires something most people avoid, an honest exploration of the self. Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, the dark side of our personality that contains all the traits we reject or ignore. While the shadow is uncomfortable to face, it is essential for growth. Ignoring it limits us, but integrating, owning even our flaws and contradictions makes us whole. Real success demands this kind of wholeness. It's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about daring to be authentic. Success, in Jung's eyes, is not measured by money, fame, or applause. It is measured by individuation, the process of becoming who you really are. Most people live as fragments of themselves, wearing masks to fit into society, but masks can't bring fulfillment. They only bring exhaustion. Jung's call is simple, yet profound. Become who you are. That means embracing both light and shadow, strength and vulnerability. That means stepping away from the comfort of imitation and into the power of self-discovery. But this process is not easy. Jung understood that transformation often begins with a crisis. The moment when the old version of you no longer fits, and a new self begins to emerge. These are the times when life feels uncertain, when everything you've built starts to crack. Yet those cracks, Jung would say, are not signs of failure. They are the signs that a deeper truth is trying to break through. He once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The pain you feel during moments of change isn't the end of your story. It's the fire that forges the person you're meant to become. Jung also emphasized the role of dreams, not just the aspirations we speak of when awake, but the symbolic, often strange images our unconscious sends us in sleep. He believed that dreams are messages from the self to the self, guiding us toward inner alignment. If we ignore these messages, we risk living someone else's life. But if we listen, we begin to decode the language of our soul. In this decoding process, we find direction, healing, and strength. Self-reflection, too, is critical. Jung didn't offer quick, fix advice or motivational slogans. Instead, he challenged people to do deep work, to journal, to reflect, to analyze their patterns, to ask, why do I keep repeating the same mistakes? Why do I sabotage my progress? Through this introspection, we begin to take responsibility, not blame, but ownership. This is the moment when we stop waiting for the world to change and start changing ourselves. Becoming your best self, then, is not about achieving more, it's about being more conscious, more integrated, more aligned with your inner truth. Jung taught that the most successful people are those who have dared to confront themselves fully. Not because they are fearless, but because they are willing to walk through fear in search of authenticity. They become powerful not by dominating others, but by mastering their own inner world. This is the revolution Jung inspires, a revolution of consciousness. It's quiet, it's invisible, but it's the most important work you'll ever do. When you begin to see yourself clearly, you begin to live clearly. And when you live clearly, success is not something you chase. It becomes a natural expression of who you are. Success starts with you, not the edited version of you, not the socially acceptable version, but the raw, real, evolving soul beneath it all. That is the message of Carl Jung, and that is the beginning of becoming your best self. Success is a word we often associate with external achievements. Money, recognition, titles, influence. But Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers in psychology, challenged this conventional view. He believed that real success is rooted not in what we acquire but in who we become. And to truly become someone of depth, integrity, and purpose, we must first understand ourselves. Self-awareness, in Jung's philosophy, is not optional. It is the foundation upon which all meaningful growth is built. Without it, we are simply actors playing roles we didn't choose, following scripts we don't understand, and wondering why happiness and fulfillment always seem out of reach. From the moment we are born, we begin absorbing messages from our environment, our families, schools, cultures, and societies. These influences shape our beliefs, values, and behaviors. Over time, we begin to form an identity based on what others expect of us. We might become the obedient child, the overachiever, the peacemaker, the rebel, all in response to our environment. While these roles help us survive and gain acceptance, they often lead us away from our authentic selves. We lose touch with our inner voice because we are too busy performing the parts we think we're supposed to play. Carl Jung emphasized the importance of turning inward. He believed that most people live with only a fraction of their full awareness. They operate on autopilot, driven by unconscious motives, unresolved wounds, and inherited patterns. Until these forces are brought into conscious awareness, they control our lives. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, the challenges, patterns, and emotional struggles that seem to repeat in our lives are often not due to bad luck or external forces, but a lack of self-awareness. So what does it mean to become self-aware? At its core, self-awareness is the ability to observe yourself, your thoughts, emotions, desires, and behaviors, without judgment. It means asking questions like, why do I react this way in certain situations? What beliefs am I holding on to that might no longer serve me? What are my triggers, and where do they come from? It requires the courage to look beneath the surface and confront parts of ourselves that we might have hidden, denied, or misunderstood. This is not easy work. In fact, it can be deeply uncomfortable, but it is also the most liberating work you will ever do. In Jungian psychology, self-awareness is the gateway to individuation, the process of becoming your true self. This is not about becoming a better version of what society wants you to be. It is about shedding the false layers and discovering the essence of who you already are beneath all the noise. Individuation requires a deep commitment to inner work, examining your history, your patterns, your wounds, and your potential. It is the recognition that every experience, no matter how painful, holds a mirror to something inside of you that wants to be healed or integrated. One of the first steps to self-awareness is observing your thoughts. Many people are so fused with their thinking that they don't realize they have the power to step back and witness it. Jung believed that our thoughts are not always our own. They are often shaped by collective ideas, unconscious complexes, and emotional conditioning. When you begin to notice the stories you tell yourself, the self-doubt, the judgment, the fear, you begin to separate your true self from the mental chatter. You start to see that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. Another critical aspect of self-awareness is emotional intelligence. Emotions are not random reactions. They are signals that carry valuable information. Anger might point to a boundary that was crossed. Sadness might reveal a loss that hasn't been grieved. Anxiety might uncover a need for safety and control. When you suppress or ignore your emotions, you disconnect from yourself. But when you learn to feel your emotions fully and listen to their message, you develop a deeper understanding of your inner world. This allows you to respond to life with clarity and intention rather than react out of habit. Carl Jung also spoke about archetypes and the collective unconscious universal symbols and patterns shared across humanity. These archetypes, such as the hero, the sage, the shadow, or the inner child, exist within all of us. Becoming aware of these inner figures can provide profound insight into our behavior and choices. For example, someone who is always trying to rescue others might be unconsciously playing the role of the hero while neglecting their own needs. Another person might be dominated by the inner critic, constantly feeling they are not enough. By identifying these inner dynamics, you begin to reclaim control over your life and make conscious choices rather than being pulled by unconscious forces. Self-awareness also involves recognizing your values, what truly matters to you. Many people chase goals because they think they should, not because those goals align with their deeper purpose. They pursue careers, relationships, and lifestyles that look good on the outside but feel empty on the inside. When you become aware of your true values, you begin to make decisions that bring you closer to authenticity. You stop seeking approval and start seeking alignment. This shift is powerful. It creates integrity between who you are and how you live. One of the most profound benefits of self-awareness is that it creates space between stimulus and response. When you are unaware, you react, often defensively or impulsively. But when you are aware, you pause. You observe your internal state, you reflect, and then you choose how to respond. This simple shift changes everything. It transforms relationships, improves communication, enhances emotional resilience, and leads to wiser decisions. In a world that often demands fast reactions, self-awareness offers you the gift of thoughtful response. It is important to note that self-awareness is not a destination. It is a lifelong journey. You do not become fully aware overnight. There will always be more to discover, more to understand, more to integrate. But every moment of reflection, every honest conversation with yourself, every insight gained, these are steps toward wholeness. The more you understand yourself, the more empowered you become. You stop living by default and start living by design. Carl Jung's work teaches us that success is not out there waiting to be chased. It is within you, waiting to be discovered, and the key to discovering it is self-awareness. It is the first step, the daily practice, and the lifelong foundation of becoming your best self. Without it, no amount of external success will satisfy you. But with it, even the simplest moments can become meaningful because they reflect who you truly are. Within every human being exists a part of the self that remains hidden, rejected, or repressed, a side we avoid showing to others and often even to ourselves. Carl Jung named this aspect of the psyche the shadow. The shadow contains the traits, desires, emotions, and impulses that we have been taught to suppress. These might include anger, envy, selfishness, pride, laziness, or even hidden strengths that our environment discourage. But rather than being evil or dangerous by nature, the shadow simply represents the parts of ourselves that we've disowned because they didn't fit with our self-image or society's expectations. Jung believed that embracing the shadow is not just an act of personal healing, it is a necessary step in becoming whole. Without this integration, we remain fragmented, ruled by unconscious forces that sabotage our potential and limit our success. The journey toward personal growth and self-actualization often begins with a desire to improve, to be more disciplined, confident, or successful. But what many people overlook is that true growth doesn't come from adding more to ourselves. It comes from reclaiming what we've lost or denied. Most of us wear masks every day. We try to appear kind, strong, humble, or wise, depending on the image we want to project. But in doing so, we push parts of ourselves into the shadows. These parts don't disappear. They simply retreat into the unconscious, where they continue to influence our behavior in ways we don't recognize. When we snap at someone unexpectedly, when we sabotage a good opportunity, when we feel a deep, unexplainable shame or fear, it is often the shadow acting out from behind the scenes. Jung didn't view the shadow as something to be destroyed or eliminated. He saw it as something to be acknowledged, accepted, and integrated. The parts of ourselves we consider bad or wrong are often misunderstood. For instance, someone who was punished for expressing anger as a child may grow into an adult who represses anger altogether, becoming overly passive or people-pleasing. But that suppressed anger might contain valuable energy, boundaries, or self-respect that the person needs in order to thrive. Another person might deny their ambition because they were taught it's selfish to want more. Yet that ambition could drive them toward meaningful goals. In this way, the shadow is not just a collection of negative traits. It also contains powerful qualities that have been misjudged or shamed. Embracing the shadow requires radical honesty. It means looking at yourself without filters, excuses, or defenses. It involves asking uncomfortable questions. What emotions do I avoid at all costs? What behaviors in others trigger a strong reaction in me, and why? What qualities do I judge harshly in others that might actually reflect something within me? This process is not easy. It can be painful to admit that you are capable of resentment, manipulation, or cowardice. But Jung believed that facing these truths is essential to becoming whole. Denial keeps us stuck in illusions. Acceptance frees us to make conscious choices. When we deny the shadow, it doesn't go away, it just shows up in distorted ways. It might appear in projections, where we attribute our rejected traits to other people. For example, someone who refuses to acknowledge their own competitiveness might accuse others of being overly aggressive. Someone who disowns their own need for attention might envy or criticize people who are in the spotlight. These projections not only damage our relationships, but they also prevent us from understanding ourselves. The moment we reclaim our projections and take responsibility for what we see in others, we begin the process of integrating the shadow. We start to realize that what we despise or fear in others often reflects something unresolved within us. The integration of the shadow doesn't mean we act out every dark impulse. It means we become aware of those impulses and learn to work with them consciously. For example, recognizing that you have a controlling side doesn't mean you go out and dominate people. It means you understand your need for control and explore where it comes from. Perhaps it's rooted in past experiences of chaos or insecurity. By understanding it, you gain power over it, rather than letting it run your life from behind the curtain. Jung believed that the goal is not perfection, but wholeness. Wholeness includes light and dark, strength and vulnerability, virtue and flaw. When you integrate the shadow, you don't become worse. You become more human, more grounded, and more capable of authentic success. One of the powerful outcomes of embracing your shadow is that it enhances your empathy. When you understand your own darkness, you stop judging others so harshly. You recognize that everyone has struggles, contradictions, and hidden pain. This makes you a better friend, partner, leader, and creator. Instead of pretending to be above others, you meet them on common ground. This humility is not weakness. It's strength rooted in self-knowledge. Jung believed that without this integration, people become moralistic, rigid, or even dangerous, because they believe they are purely good and project all evil onto others. History is full of examples where the refusal to face one's shadow has led to conflict, prejudice, and violence. But the person who owns their darkness becomes less reactive, more balanced, and deeply aware of their impact on the world. Shadow work is not a one-time exercise. It is a lifelong practice. The unconscious mind is vast, and new layers of the shadow may emerge as we move through life. Each time we step into a new role, becoming a parent, starting a business, entering a relationship, we may discover new aspects of ourselves that challenge our self-image. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of ongoing reflection, therapy, journaling, and dream analysis. Dreams, in particular, were central to Jung's method, as he believed they reveal truths that the conscious mind is not yet ready to face. A dream filled with anxiety, conflict, or strange characters may be a message from the shadow, calling attention to something that needs to be explored or integrated. It's important to approach this process with compassion. The goal is not to shame or punish yourself for your flaws. It's to understand where they come from and how they've shaped you. Often, the traits in the shadow developed as survival mechanisms. A child who learned to be silent because expressing themselves was unsafe may grow into an adult who struggles with communication. That silence, once protective, now becomes a limitation. But when understood, it can be transformed into something powerful, like deep listening, careful observation, or thoughtful speech. The same goes for all traits in the shadow. When we embrace them, we gain access to their original purpose and transform them into assets. Success, in Jung's view, is not about becoming a sanitized version of yourself that the world finds acceptable. It's about becoming your whole self, honest, conscious, and integrated. The journey of embracing the shadow is the path to true empowerment. When you no longer fear what's inside you, nothing outside of you can control you. You stop living in fear of being exposed or judged because you have already seen the darkest parts of yourself and survived. You walk through the world with a quiet strength, knowing that you are no longer divided against yourself. This inner unity is the source of true confidence and clarity. Carl Jung's teachings remind us that the most powerful person is not the one who hides their darkness, but the one who has made peace with it. When you embrace your shadow, you reclaim your lost energy, your forgotten potential, and your full humanity. You become real, you become whole, and in that wholeness lies the beginning of lasting, meaningful success. In a world saturated with expectations, social norms, and constant comparisons, it's easy to lose sight of who you truly are. From the earliest moments of life, you are shaped by forces beyond your control. Parents telling you what's right and wrong, schools grading your worth through numbers, peers nudging you to fit in, and media painting pictures of success and happiness. Before long, you start to mimic what is rewarded, praised, or admired. You try to become what others expect, even if it means abandoning parts of yourself. Carl Jung recognized this tendency to imitate as a barrier to personal growth. He believed that the real purpose of life is not to fit in or conform, but to individuate, to become the person you are truly meant to be. Individuation, as Jung defined it, is the lifelong psychological process of integrating all parts of the self, both conscious and unconscious, to arrive at a state of wholeness. It's the path toward becoming your best self, not by copying others, but by discovering and embodying your unique essence. The challenge of individuation begins with the ego, the part of the mind responsible for identity and self-image. The ego wants to be liked, respected, and accepted. It craves recognition and approval. It often aligns with external standards and seeks validation from outside sources. But the ego is not the whole self. It's a small part, a surface expression. Beneath it lies the self, a deeper, more authentic center that includes the totality of who you are. Your dreams, fears, talents, wounds, contradictions, and potential. The process of individuation involves peeling back the layers of ego-constructed identity to uncover and express this deeper self. Many people spend their lives in imitation without even realizing it. They chase careers their families admire, pursue relationships that look good on paper, adopt political beliefs or religious views without examining them deeply, and measure their worth by how closely they align with the dominant culture. Jung believed this kind of unconscious imitation leads to inner emptiness and psychological conflict. You might achieve external success, but inside, you feel a nagging discontent. Something feels off, like you're wearing someone else's clothes, functional, perhaps even fashionable, but not truly yours. That feeling is your psyche calling you back to yourself, urging you to begin the journey of individuation. Individuation is not about rebellion for the sake of being different. It's not a teenage act of defiance. It's a mature, conscious decision to explore your own truth, even if that truth doesn't match what others expect. It requires deep reflection and a willingness to confront parts of yourself that have been hidden or neglected. It means paying attention to your inner voice, your dreams, your emotional reactions, and your intuitive pulls. These are the breadcrumbs left by the self, guiding you toward a more aligned life, but following them can be terrifying, especially if they lead you away from the path you've always known. The road to individuation is marked by tension because it often requires breaking away from the collective. Jung called this the conflict between the individual and the collective psyche. The collective wants conformity, it thrives on predictability and sameness. The individual, on the other hand, seeks expression and uniqueness. When you begin to individuate, you may feel alienated. Friends and family might not understand your choices. Society might label you eccentric, impractical, or even selfish. But this discomfort is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of progress. It means you are no longer living a life scripted by others. You are beginning to write your own. Individuation also requires facing your unconscious. Jung believed that the unconscious contains the key to our individuality. It holds not only the shadow, our rejected traits and hidden impulses, but also our inner potential, creativity, and spiritual direction. The more you engage with the unconscious through dreams, symbols, active imagination, and self-inquiry, the more you discover who you really are beneath the surface. Jung often used the example of dreams as a communication from the unconscious. While the ego dreams of success, fame, or love, the unconscious may show you a crumbling house, a dark forest, or a mysterious stranger. These symbols are not random. They are messages from the self, guiding you toward the parts of yourself you have yet to integrate. This process is not linear. Individuation is not a straight line from confusion to clarity. It is cyclical, unfolding in layers. You may have moments of breakthrough followed by periods of doubt. You may feel strong and centered one day and completely lost the next. That is normal. Growth is not about constant certainty. It is about increasing depth. Each time you shed an old identity or belief, you get closer to your core. And with each step, you become more capable of living a life that feels real, meaningful, and self-directed. One of the most profound realizations on the path of individuation is that your uniqueness is your gift. The traits, experiences, and perspectives that set you apart are not flaws to be hidden, but clues to your purpose. Jung believed that every individual has a specific role to play in the unfolding of the world, something only they can do, a truth only they can speak, a life only they can live. But this can only be discovered through inner work, not outer imitation. No book, guru, or authority can tell you who you are. They can point the way, but the journey is yours alone. Individuation also transforms your relationships. When you are stuck in imitation, relationships are often transactional. You play a role, the other person plays theirs, and both of you are stuck in expectations. But when you individuate, you bring your full, authentic self into connection. You no longer need to perform or please. You relate from a place of truth and wholeness. This deepens intimacy and allows for genuine mutual growth. You stop demanding that others complete you or validate you. because you have already begun to validate yourself. Jung's concept of individuation was deeply spiritual. He saw it not just as psychological development, but as a sacred journey toward the divine within. He believed that the self was not just a personal identity, but a symbol of the deeper, transcendent order of existence. To individuate is to align your human experience with this greater order. Find meaning not just in pleasure or success, but in authenticity, connection, and the unfolding of your inner truth. This is what makes individuation so powerful. It is not just about becoming different, it is about becoming real. Success in the modern world is often defined by comparison: who has more, who is better, who wins. But success through the lens of individuation is measured by alignment, how closely your life reflects your soul. A person who earns less but lives in integrity with their values is more successful by Jungian standards than someone who earns millions by betraying their truth. A person who dares to pursue art, healing, invention, or a quiet life of simplicity, even when society doesn't reward it, is living a deeper kind of success. Individuation reclaims success from the realm of competition and brings it back to the realm of meaning. This doesn't mean you ignore ambition or dismiss goals. On the contrary, Jung believed that when you align with your true self, your goals become more powerful because they are fueled by authenticity. You're no longer chasing success to prove your worth. You're expressing your worth through success. You're no longer building a life to impress others. You're building a life that expresses who you are. This kind of success is sustainable, fulfilling, and deeply rooted in your being. Carl Jung's message was clear: don't live someone else's life. Don't wear someone else's mask. Don't measure yourself by someone else's yardstick. The most important journey you can take is the one inward, toward the unique, mysterious, magnificent self that lives at your core. Only by knowing and embracing that self can you live a life that is not only successful in appearance, but truly meaningful in essence. Individuation is not the easy path, but it is the only path that leads you home to yourself. In a world where noise dominates every corner of life, social media notifications, breaking news alerts, other people's opinions, societal pressures, and the relentless chase of material ambitions, it becomes increasingly difficult to hear the most important voice of all, your own inner voice. This inner voice, subtle and often drowned out by the external world, is what Carl Jung considered the compass of the soul. He didn't speak of the inner voice as mere thoughts or passing desires, but as the guiding force from the self, the deeper, wiser part of the psyche that transcends the ego. Jung believed that reconnecting with this voice is not only a path to healing, but an essential step toward living a meaningful and individuated life. Yet, listening to the inner voice requires courage, patience, and a willingness to go against the grain of what the world expects. The inner voice is not always loud or obvious. It doesn't shout like the advertisements that promise happiness with the next purchase or the mentors who insist they have all the answers. It is quiet, gentle, and often inconvenient. It may whisper to leave a job that looks perfect on the outside, but feels dead on the inside. It may nudge you to speak a truth you've long buried for the sake of peace. It may call you to a passion that doesn't promise wealth or fame, but feels inexplicably right. Jung taught that this voice is the expression of the self trying to guide you toward wholeness. It speaks through intuition, dreams, symbols, synchronicities, and emotional resonance. When you feel inexplicable joy, resistance, or clarity, your inner voice is at work. One reason people struggle to listen to their inner voice is because it often conflicts with the ego. The ego is concerned with appearance, control, and safety. It is the mask we wear to move through society. It wants to belong, to win, to achieve, but the inner voice isn't concerned with superficial success. It is aligned with authenticity, meaning, and truth. following it can feel risky. It might ask you to change direction, admit vulnerability, or step into uncertainty. But what Jung emphasized is that ignoring this voice doesn't keep you safe, it keeps you stuck. When you deny the call of the self, you may achieve external milestones, but you lose touch with the soul, resulting in emptiness, anxiety, or a quiet sense of something missing. Jung described this as spiritual hunger. Many people live with a low-grade dissatisfaction, even after accumulating wealth, status, or accomplishments. They feel like something is missing, but can't name what it is. That feeling is often the soul's longing to be heard. The inner voice has been buried under layers of roles, identities, and conditioning. To recover it, you must become still. You must create space for reflection, solitude, and silence. Jung believed that modern people are afraid of silence because, in silence, the unconscious begins to speak. It brings up feelings we've pushed away, desires we've denied, and truths we've ignored. But it is in this sacred silence that the inner voice can be heard. The inner voice also speaks through dreams, a vital part of Jung's psychological theory. Dreams are not just random firings of the brain. They are messages from the unconscious mind. Jung encouraged people to record and reflect on their dreams, not to interpret them in a literal way, but to uncover their symbolic meanings. A recurring image, a strange creature, a forgotten childhood home, these are not meaningless. They are clues. They are pieces of a puzzle your deeper self is trying to reveal. Listening to these dream messages strengthens your connection with your inner voice. You begin to recognize the difference between ego-driven thoughts and soul-driven guidance. Another powerful medium through which the inner voice emerges is intuition. Intuition is the felt sense of knowing something without knowing how you know it. It's the gut feeling that something is wrong, even if everything looks fine. It's the spontaneous insight that arrives when you're not thinking about the problem. Jung placed high value on intuition as one of the 4 primary psychological functions, alongside thinking, feeling, and sensation. He believed that developing intuition helps balance the overly rational, logical mind that dominates modern society. The inner voice doesn't always use words. It often communicates through sensation, emotion, and resonance. Learning to trust your intuition is learning to trust the wisdom within you. Yet, in a society that idolizes logic and data, intuitive knowing is often dismissed. We are taught to value proof over perception, analysis over awareness. As a result, many people disconnect from their inner voice, second-guess themselves, and outsource their decisions to others. Jung warned of this danger. He believed that blindly following external authority, whether it's a religion, government, teacher, or trend, leads to spiritual stagnation. While external guidance can be useful, it must always be filtered through your own inner truth. No one else can walk your path. The voice that knows what is right for you already exists inside you. Listening to the inner voice is not a passive act. It requires discernment, reflection, and sometimes immense bravery. Not every thought or impulse is the voice of the self. The unconscious also contains fears, wounds, and projections. The key is to listen deeply, consistently, and humbly. One powerful method Jung used to connect with the inner voice was active imagination. This technique involves entering into dialogue with images, symbols, or inner figures that emerge from the unconscious. By engaging with these aspects of the psyche in a creative and conscious way, you allow your inner voice to speak more clearly. It's not about fantasizing, but about bringing unconscious content into conscious awareness so it can inform your life. The rewards of listening to your inner voice are profound. It leads to decisions that feel aligned rather than forced. It brings a sense of peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. It fuels creativity, because when you stop trying to imitate others, you begin to create from your essence. It also cultivates self-trust. Each time you honor your inner voice, whether in a big life choice or a quiet boundary, you reinforce the message that your soul is worth listening to. Over time, this builds a life of integrity where your outer world reflects your inner truth. There is also a moral dimension to the inner voice. Jung believed that true ethics are not enforced from the outside, but emerge from inner alignment. When you are in touch with yourself, you act with a natural sense of rightness, not because someone told you to, but because it feels true. This is a different kind of morality, not based on rules, but on resonance. You begin to live not by fear of punishment or desire for reward, but by a deep internal compass. This is the essence of responsibility, the ability to respond truthfully from within. The inner voice often leads you through darkness before it leads you to light. It might call you to confront a painful truth, revisit a childhood wound, or let go of an identity you've clung to for years. But Jung taught that suffering has purpose when it leads to growth. The discomfort of listening to your inner voice is the discomfort of transformation. Just as a seed must crack open before it grows, so too must the false self dissolve for the true self to emerge. This is why Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." But the pain is not the end, it is the threshold. In the end, listening to your inner voice is not about finding easy answers. It's about entering into a lifelong relationship with your soul. It's about slowing down enough to hear what's always been speaking underneath the noise. It's about realizing that the guidance you've been seeking has been within you all along. Carl Jung didn't offer simple steps or formulas. He offered a path, a deep, personal, often mysterious path toward wholeness, and the first step on that path is to be still, turn inward, and listen. The voice you hear may be quiet, but it is the truest voice you'll ever know. Human beings are born into a world that demands goodness, politeness, decency, and order. From an early age, children are taught what is acceptable and what isn't, what parts of themselves are welcome and what must be hidden away. Praise is given to the behaviors and traits that conform to these expectations, while shame or punishment follows anything seen as undesirable. Over time, individuals unconsciously begin to suppress aspects of themselves that don't fit into this mold. Anger, jealousy, selfishness, lust, even ambition or assertiveness if they seem too threatening. These suppressed traits do not disappear. Instead, they gather in what Carl Jung called the shadow, the dark, unconscious part of the psyche that holds everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. According to Jung, the journey toward becoming your best self does not lie in denying or avoiding the shadow, but in recognizing, confronting, and ultimately integrating it into your conscious personality. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is not a demon to be exorcised or a flaw to be eradicated. Rather, it is a natural and necessary part of the human psyche. It includes not only what is socially taboo, but also the aspects of ourselves that have simply been left undeveloped or devalued. For example, someone raised to always be agreeable and accommodating may suppress their assertiveness and develop resentment or passive aggression. Another person taught that vulnerability is weakness may repress their emotional side and become rigid or disconnected. Over time, the shadow grows in complexity and power, and the more it is denied, the more it influences our lives from behind the scenes. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is the essence of the shadow's danger, not that it exists, but that we are unaware of it. One of the most common ways the shadow reveals itself is through projection. When we see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves, we are projecting. We may hate someone's arrogance without realizing that we secretly long to be more confident. We may judge another's emotional vulnerability while suppressing our own need to be held and understood. These reactions are not just about the other person. They are mirrors showing us what lies in our own darkness. Jung believed that the things we most resist or criticize in others often point to unresolved elements within ourselves. By observing our strong emotional reactions, especially those that seem irrational or exaggerated, we gain clues to our shadow. Shadow work begins by being honest about who we really are, not who we want to be, not who we pretend to be, but who we actually are beneath the surface. This honesty requires humility. It means admitting that we are capable of cruelty, selfishness, envy, pride, lust, fear, and many other uncomfortable states. But Jung's insight was that recognizing the shadow doesn't make us worse people. It makes us whole. In fact, by acknowledging our darker impulses, we become less likely to act them out unconsciously. A person who is aware of their aggression can channel it constructively. A person who accepts their fear can learn to act in spite of it. Suppression leads to distortion. Awareness leads to transformation. Facing the shadow is not pleasant work. It often stirs guilt, shame, and discomfort. But these emotions are not signs that we are bad. They are signs that we are growing. Jung emphasized that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To walk the path of authenticity is to walk through the cave of one's own fears and rejections. It's to look in the mirror and see not only the hero but also the villain, and in doing so, to recognize that both live within us and that healing lies in the integration, not the exclusion, of all our parts. This process is not about indulging the shadow or justifying destructive behavior. It's about giving the shadow a voice, so it no longer needs to scream for attention. For example, instead of erupting in rage or manipulating others, a person who has faced their anger might learn to express boundaries clearly and assertively. Instead of sabotaging relationships out of fear of vulnerability, someone who has integrated their emotional shadow may learn to open up with honesty and care. The energy locked in the shadow, once reclaimed, becomes a source of creativity, strength, and authenticity. Art, journaling, therapy, and dream work are powerful tools in this journey. Dreams, in particular, are rich in shadow symbolism. Jung encouraged people to pay attention to recurring symbols, threatening figures, or uncomfortable scenarios in dreams, not to dismiss them as nightmares, but to treat them as messages from the unconscious. A dream about being chased, falling, or being exposed often reflects aspects of the shadow trying to break through to the surface. These dreams are invitations, not punishments, to look more closely at the parts of ourselves we have disowned. The shadow also has a collective dimension. Just as individuals have shadows, so do families, communities, and societies. Racism, sexism, religious intolerance, and other forms of collective injustice can be understood, in part, as unintegrated societal shadows, traits that groups refuse to acknowledge in themselves and instead project onto others. Jung warned that without conscious confrontation of the collective shadow, society risks collapse into violence, scapegoating, and totalitarianism. This makes personal shadow work not only a path to individual wholeness, but also a contribution to the healing of the world. By owning our darkness, we reduce the need to blame, attack, or dominate others. Jung also believed that the shadow is the doorway to the self, the total, unified center of our personality that includes both light and dark, conscious and unconscious. To reach the self, one must pass through the shadow. This is a profound psychological and spiritual truth. Many spiritual traditions speak of the dark night of the soul, a period of suffering or confusion that precedes enlightenment. Jung's shadow theory provides a psychological framework for this experience. The descent into the shadow is not a detour, it is part of the journey. Only by confronting what we fear or deny can we discover who we truly are. Some people may resist shadow work because they fear what they'll find. They believe that if they look too closely, they'll discover something irredeemable. But Jung had immense faith in the human psyche. He believed that at the core of every person is not only darkness, but also deep wisdom and potential. The shadow is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of transformation. When we embrace our darkness, we also unlock our light. When we integrate our shadow, we become capable of real compassion, not just toward others, but toward ourselves. This compassion is crucial. Shadow work is not about beating yourself up for being imperfect. It's about learning to hold your flaws and wounds with honesty and care. It's about saying, yes, this too is me, and choosing to grow rather than hide. The parts of ourselves that we most fear are often the ones most in need of love. And when we stop judging those parts, we begin to heal. In the end, embracing the shadow is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. It is the act of turning inward, facing the truth, and walking through the fire of self-awareness to emerge more grounded, more real, and more capable of living a life aligned with your deepest truth. Jung did not promise that this path would be easy, but he knew it was necessary. As long as the shadow remains unacknowledged, it controls us. But once brought into the light, it becomes a source of power, insight, and transformation. The journey toward your best self does not begin by denying your darkness. It begins by facing it. And in doing so, you find not only your buried wounds, but your buried gold. Suffering is an inevitable part of the human experience. No one escapes life without pain, loss, fear, disappointment, or inner conflict. The world often teaches us to avoid suffering at all costs, to medicate it, suppress it, distract from it, or outrun it through success, achievement, or pleasure. But Carl Jung, with profound psychological and spiritual insight, suggested something far more radical and redemptive. Suffering, when faced honestly and consciously, is not a meaningless burden, but a potential gateway to meaning, growth, and individuation. He did not glorify pain, nor did he suggest we should seek it, but he deeply believed that within suffering lies the possibility of transformation. And to become your best self, you must learn not to escape suffering, but to understand what it is trying to teach you. According to Jung, suffering often arises from inner division. The psyche, like the body, seeks wholeness. When parts of us are split off, when our desires conflict with our values, when our public face hides our true feelings, when the conscious mind denies the voice of the unconscious, we experience tension, anxiety, and inner turmoil. This psychological friction is a form of suffering, yet it is also a signal that something within us needs attention. Jung emphasized that symptoms are not random malfunctions, they are messengers. Depression, anxiety, compulsions, nightmares. These are not just disorders to eliminate, but expressions of the soul's cry for balance, authenticity, and integration. In this way, suffering becomes a kind of spiritual compass. It hurts not because we are broken, but because we are out of alignment with who we truly are. People often ask why suffering happens to them, especially when they feel they've done everything right. Jung would gently reframe that question. He would ask, what part of you is calling for awakening through this suffering? What truth have you ignored? What part of your story remains unlived? What wound has not yet been healed? He believed that deep suffering often accompanies the moments when our old identity begins to break apart. This disintegration of the ego A painful but necessary process makes room for the emergence of a deeper, more integrated self. We do not grow by staying comfortable. We grow when we are challenged, humbled, and brought to the edges of what we think we can endure. This idea is not abstract. It plays out in real, lived experiences. A career loss may feel like failure on the surface, but it may also force you to confront your true values and redirect your energy toward a calling you had buried. The end of a relationship may trigger grief and self-doubt, but it may also bring to light patterns you've repeated unconsciously, opening the door to deeper emotional maturity. A period of illness or isolation may slow you down and strip away distractions, allowing you to finally meet yourself without masks. These moments of suffering, while excruciating, often contain the seeds of meaning. But meaning does not automatically arise from suffering. It requires conscious engagement, a willingness to sit with the pain, listen to its message, and respond with integrity. Jung warned of the dangers of repressing suffering. When we deny or minimize our pain, we don't eliminate it. We drive it underground, where it festers and influences our thoughts, behaviors, and relationships in unconscious ways. Repressed grief can turn into cynicism. Repressed anger can become depression. Repressed fear can become paralysis. To break this cycle, Jung encouraged what he called the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are by integrating all aspects of the psyche, including the wounded and suffering parts. This process demands that we face suffering not with resistance, but with openness. A powerful aspect of Jung's approach to suffering lies in his attention to symbols, archetypes, and myths. He saw that throughout human history, stories of transformation, whether found in religion, folklore, or dreams, often follow a similar pattern. The hero must descend into darkness before they can rise. There is always a journey through the underworld, a confrontation with dragons, a period of death before rebirth. These stories are not just ancient tales. They reflect the structure of the human psyche. Suffering, in this symbolic framework, is the descent. It is the necessary encounter with the dark night of the soul. Jung believed that these mythic patterns are not outside us. They live within us. By understanding our suffering in mythic terms, we stop seeing it as punishment and begin to see it as initiation. This doesn't mean the pain becomes easier. Grief still breaks the heart. Loneliness still hurts. Failure still wounds the pride. But when we view these experiences as part of a larger psychological and spiritual evolution, we begin to hold them differently. We stop asking, "How can I get out of this?" and begin asking, "What is this trying to reveal to me?" That shift from avoidance to inquiry is where meaning begins to emerge, and meaning is what makes suffering bearable. Jung also emphasized that suffering connects us to others. In our wounds, we find our shared humanity. The person who has suffered deeply and worked through it can offer compassion and presence to others in pain. This is why wounded healers often make the most effective therapists, mentors, and guides. They do not offer shallow positivity or quick fixes. They offer presence, depth, and understanding because they have walked the path themselves. Jung believed that suffering, when processed with consciousness, can turn people into vessels of wisdom. The scar becomes the source of strength. The suffering, rather than breaking us, shapes us into something deeper and more authentic. An important aspect of this process is patience. In the modern world, we are conditioned to seek fast results. But inner transformation doesn't follow a linear timeline. The psyche moves at its own pace. Some wounds take years to understand, let alone heal. Jung saw the psyche not as a machine to be fixed, but as a living mystery to be explored. He encouraged people to stay with their suffering, not to wallow in it, but to remain present with it long enough to understand its roots and allow its meaning to unfold. This requires a different kind of strength, a quiet, enduring courage to sit with what is uncomfortable and unclear. Dreams, once again, play an important role in this process. Jung believed that dreams often contain images and messages from the unconscious that help us navigate suffering. A dream of drowning might symbolize feeling overwhelmed by emotion. A dream of wandering through a forest might represent a period of confusion or searching. By paying attention to these symbolic expressions, we begin to dialogue with our unconscious and receive guidance that the rational mind cannot provide. This inner dialogue becomes a form of self-companionship, a way of staying connected to the deeper wisdom within even when everything on the outside feels chaotic. Art, too, can serve as a bridge between suffering and meaning. Jung encouraged people to draw, paint, write, or create not to achieve perfection, but to express what the conscious mind cannot articulate. Through creativity, the pain is externalized, shaped, and given form. In this way, suffering is no longer just something to endure. It becomes a source of expression and even beauty. Some of the greatest works of art, literature, and philosophy have emerged from profound suffering. They are testaments to the human capacity to transform pain into meaning and despair into insight. At the core of Jung's message about suffering is the belief that each person has a unique path. Your suffering is not a mistake. It is part of the story you are here to live, and within that story lies a deeper calling to know yourself, to grow into your potential, and to become a conscious participant in your own evolution. This path is not always joyful, but it is meaningful. It requires you to trust the process, even when you cannot see the outcome. It asks you to surrender control and open to something greater, what Jung called the self, the inner wholeness that transcends the ego. To find meaning through suffering is not to erase the pain, but to walk through it with awareness. It is to trust that even in the darkest moments, something within you is still guiding, still growing, still calling you toward your best self. Jung believed that in the depths of our suffering lies the potential for rebirth. It is not a guarantee, but a possibility, a sacred possibility that unfolds when we choose to face our suffering with honesty, courage, and heart. At the heart of Carl Jung's life's work lies a single, powerful idea. To become your best self, you must become your true self. This journey of becoming fully who you are, what Jung called individuation, is not about self-improvement in the conventional sense. It's not about perfecting the ego, meeting external expectations, or shaping yourself to fit into society's mold. Instead, it is about peeling away the layers of false identity, conditioned roles, and unconscious influences to uncover and live from your innermost essence. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, of integrating the many facets of your personality into a unified, authentic self. And this process demands, above all, that you live with radical authenticity. From a young age, people are conditioned to behave in ways that earn approval and avoid rejection. Children learn quickly what parts of themselves are celebrated: obedience, politeness, conformity, and what parts are shamed or punished: anger, defiance, vulnerability. Over time, this conditioning forms what Jung called the persona, the social mask we wear to fit in and function in the world. The persona is necessary to some degree. It allows people to navigate social environments and fulfill roles: teacher, parent, friend, leader. But when the persona becomes too dominant or disconnected from the deeper self, it creates a false identity. People begin to confuse who they are with the roles they play. They feel empty, lost, or anxious without knowing why. Jung saw this not as a personal failure, but as a spiritual crisis, a signal that the deeper self is longing to emerge. Living authentically means shedding the false self. It requires the courage to question the life you've built around what others expect. Are your values truly yours, or were they inherited? Are your goals genuinely meaningful to you, or are they a reflection of societal ideals? Are you pursuing a career, relationship, or identity that feels alive, or merely one that feels safe? These are difficult questions, and the answers may not come easily. But Jung believed that the path of individuation begins with this kind of inquiry. To live authentically, you must be willing to disturb the surface in search of depth. You must be willing to dismantle the life you've been told to live in order to create the life that reflects who you really are. This process often involves crisis, confusion, and uncertainty. When the old identity begins to unravel, people may feel as if they are falling apart. But Jung emphasized that this disintegration of the ego is necessary for transformation. The ego, the conscious sense of self, must be humbled and reoriented so that it can enter into relationship with the unconscious, where the deeper self resides. Jung did not advocate for the destruction of the ego, but for its integration. He believed that only by bringing the unconscious into conscious awareness could a person become whole. This is the essence of individuation, a dialogue between the conscious and unconscious, between who you think you are and who you are meant to be. Dreams, symbols, and inner images play a critical role in this process. Jung encouraged people to pay attention to their dreams, not as random mental activity, but as messages from the unconscious. Recurring themes, archetypal figures, or powerful emotions in dreams often point to aspects of the self that are seeking recognition and integration. A dream about climbing a mountain might reflect a quest for inner growth. A dream about being lost might symbolize a disconnection from one's purpose. These images are not meaningless. They are the language of the soul. By exploring them, you deepen your self-awareness and move closer to authenticity. Living authentically also means embracing your contradictions. The self is not simple. It is full of tensions between independence and connection, reason and emotion, strength and vulnerability. Jung believed that wholeness comes not from choosing one side and rejecting the other, but from holding both in creative tension. A person who values intellect must also learn to honor emotion. A person who is outwardly confident must make space for insecurity. Individuation is not about becoming one-sided, but about expanding your inner capacity to contain complexity. In doing so, you become more real, more human, and more alive. This path is not without resistance. Society often rewards conformity and punishes those who stray from the norm. Living authentically may mean disappointing others. It may mean leaving relationships, jobs, or environments that no longer align with your truth. It may mean facing criticism, rejection, or loneliness. Jung understood these costs. He wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also knew that this privilege requires sacrifice. It requires choosing truth over comfort, integrity over acceptance, depth over surface. But the rewards of living authentically are profound. When you live in alignment with your inner truth, you experience a sense of meaning that cannot be manufactured. You stop seeking validation from outside because you are anchored within. You begin to act from a place of genuine purpose rather than fear or compulsion. This kind of inner freedom does not depend on circumstances. It comes from the deep knowing that your life is your own, that your choices, your voice, your path reflect who you really are. Jung also emphasized that individuation is a lifelong journey. It is not a destination you arrive at, but a continual unfolding. There is no final version of the self, only deeper and deeper expressions of wholeness. As you grow, new aspects of your personality come into view. You uncover hidden talents, buried wounds, unspoken desires. Each phase of life brings new challenges and new opportunities to deepen your authenticity. What mattered to you at 20 may no longer matter at 40. This evolution is not a failure of identity. It is a sign of growth. To individuate is to remain open to who you are becoming. This process is deeply personal, but it also has collective significance. Jung believed that when individuals individuate, they contribute to the health of society. A person who lives authentically brings more consciousness into the world. They become less reactive, less manipulative, less dependent on external approval. They are more capable of genuine relationship, creative contribution, and ethical action. In this way, individuation is not a selfish pursuit. It is an act of service. As you become whole, you help to heal the fragmentation of the world around you. Living authentically does not mean living perfectly. You will make mistakes. You will stumble. You will at times fall back into old patterns or personas. But each misstep is also a teacher. Jung encouraged a compassionate attitude toward the self, what he called the acceptance of one's own nature. This doesn't mean complacency. It means recognizing that the path of individuation is a human path, full of trial and error, light and shadow. The goal is not to become flawless, but to become real, to live from the center of your being rather than from the surface. Relationships take on new meaning when you live authentically. Instead of using others to complete you, you relate to them from a place of wholeness. You are no longer trying to impress, control, or merge. You are simply showing up as you are and inviting others to do the same. This kind of relationship between two individuated people is rare but deeply fulfilling. It is built not on dependency or illusion, but on mutual respect and self-awareness. Jung believed that the capacity for true relationship is one of the hallmarks of individuation. Creativity also flourishes when you live authentically. As you shed the constraints of the false self, your inner voice becomes louder. You begin to express yourself not to impress others, but to communicate something real. Whether through art, writing, music, business, or everyday actions, your life becomes a reflection of your inner truth. This is not about being famous or exceptional. It is about being true, and that truth, when expressed with sincerity, always carries power. Jung's vision of individuation is both psychological and spiritual. He believed that at the core of the human psyche is not just personality, but a connection to something greater, a transpersonal self that guides and supports the journey toward wholeness. This self is not the ego, but the source from which the ego draws its deepest strength. To individuate is to come into relationship with this inner source. It is to listen for its guidance in dreams, intuitions, and synchronicities. It is to recognize that you are not alone in your journey. There is something within you and beyond you that longs for your full becoming. To live authentically and individuate is to walk a path that is uniquely yours. No one else can tell you exactly how to do it. The signs will come from within, from your dreams, your body, your emotions, your yearnings. You must trust them. You must trust yourself. And in doing so, you begin to shape a life that is not only successful in the outer sense, but deeply meaningful in the inner sense. A life that reflects not who you were told to be, but who you truly are.